Welcome to the Founded For You with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders can look for all the foundational concepts and support to grow their ideas into products. Launching a product that you're building involves so much of effort. Not just in terms of shipping, but also figuring out in which ways your audience actually likes the product. Do they find value? Do they find satisfaction? There's so much involved. Of course, it's also important to align your product with the market, especially with the right problems to be solved. And today's conversation is exactly around product, market, channels, and how do you achieve a fit across all of this. With me is Emily Tate, the managing director for Mind the Product, world's largest community of passionate product people. Emily brings nearly 15 years of product experience and is focused on the craft of product management. She loves talking about new ways to make products that people love. It's so good to have Emily on the show. So, hi, Emily. Welcome to the Founders for You.
Hello.
Yeah, it's so good to finally catch up with you and talk all things product and to get started.
Great. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. So Emily, let's begin with how was your entry into product? Could you share some stories with us in terms of how did you first enter into the product space and especially leading the whole community for my product?
Yeah. So, my journey into product is like a lot of people, I will say, of my generation of product manager, which makes me feel really old. But product management was not a thing that you went to school to study. There wasn't, communities like Mind the Product didn't exist yet. So it was really kind of a thing where people fell their way into it from either marketing, business, or UX or tech or engineers. So I started off from a business background, marketing and management background, and kind of again fell into tech in general, just coming out of my MBA program. And started off mostly I started off as a product manager, but then did a short stint in marketing and then kind of back into product for a bit, building software for airlines. And I didn't do it very well, to be completely honest. Like I spent several years doing all the things that I now know are terrible to do, made all the mistakes of, assuming we knew what our customers wanted, just kind of doing big bang releases and building things for an entire year before ever seeing that they were working. And eventually I moved into a different area of Sabre, the company I worked for, where I was working on an app called Tripcase. And this had been something that was coming out of Sabre Labs, out of the kind of innovation side of the world. It was built to be, again, dating me, a test of this mobile thing, and if mobile was going to be something we should actually invest in, as well as the concept of kind of a traveler's version of their trip and what they viewed things with. So when I joined Tripcase, we had a couple 100,000 users of this app. Was one of the first apps in the App Store. Like, if those of you who remember the old, like, there's an app for that commercials that Apple did right when they opened, Tripcase was one of those. So we had a couple 100,000 users, and over the next kind of 5 years, went on a journey of rebuilding the app from the ground up, changing some of the strategy, actually productizing it, and going through a time of really great growth. And in that, I found product communities, and I found things like the Mind the Product conference, and started realizing, like, oh, there are different ways of doing this. And so I had the opportunity to kind of experiment and learn and grow into a product manager who, at this point, I would say I kind of know what I'm doing, I guess. So I think that's the hard thing for a lot of new product managers and new founders that are trying to use product techniques, is this feeling like, oh, I need to come at it and be good from day one. But I think if you talk to most of us who have been doing this for a long time, we were all terrible at it. Like, the reason we can talk about it now is because we've made literally every mistake and done everything we tell you not to do.
Yeah, I mean, so much with you on this. And I'm so glad we're having these points covered in the talk today. And to me, it feels surreal to even listen about, okay, what was product management like at a point in time when these frameworks are not there, these tried and tested methods are not there? What was it really like to enter into product space and actually work at that time. So, thank you so much for sharing that, Emily. And I also feel that what you mentioned is such an important point is that you don't have to be great from the day one. Often I feel like with respect to product management, whether it's the social communities or whether it's when product managers come together to talk, I think there's always that constant pressure about outcomes, right? Like in terms of you have to just do this, you have to get this metric right, you have to build this product this way, and there's so much of growing expectation out of this role. So I think what you just mentioned on the show is also like a very clear indication to a lot of product managers like us in terms of understanding that, yeah, it is okay to make those mistakes. So it kind of comes from a very candid place. So thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah. I think it's a thing that, there's, there early on, kind of before even a lot of like the lean methodologies and, lean startup and those kinds of things were super popular. Honestly, like agile was the thing that we were all learning and rallying around and like, oh, this is a new way of doing things. And I remember hearing, there's a guy named Adam Uretz who was speaking at an event that I was at. And he talked about this concept of like, we all feel like if you aren't agile, if you don't do agile by the book, then your product is doomed to fail. And then he pulled up like the Forbes top 10 companies in the world, and like 8 of them were tech company, and they all do things terribly. It was like, sure, you might have Apple on there who looks really good, but like AT&T, Dallas headquartered, I know very well, like so much dysfunction in that, like, all these kinds of things. And he was like, obviously, like, it is not a thing where if you aren't doing agile right, you are destined to fail. And same thing with product. Like, there are plenty of very successful products who do everything wrong. And there are plenty of products who do every part of the product discovery process, looking for their product market fit, understanding their users, building things iteratively. You're really doing build, measure, learn, that are just not going to work and are going to end up failing. So it's not a matter of like, if you do these things well, you are guaranteeing success. But what you are doing is giving yourself the best chance of success rather than just hoping you luck into it, knowing that you are at least kind of methodically trying to do different things. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, it's a lot around how much of the best effort that you put in and try to understand what's coming through with the environment, and again trying to put that input into what you're doing. So it's a constant iterative process, I guess. It's not just with respect to building products, but also product as a career is very iterative from what you just mentioned. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense. So I mean, now that we're talking about product market fit. There's one thing that I would love to hear your thoughts about, which is when people go about building their initial versions of the product, how do they find the smallest audience that can actually start believing in what they're building? Because this sounds like a crucial first step for most founders, right? So how do you do that?
yeah, this one is it can be pretty difficult. I will say, most products, particularly just greenfield startups, I think you will find a lot of them do start with family and friends. And that's a thing that feels like, oh, I don't want to start with family and friends because like they're just going to tell me the right things, et cetera, et cetera. But I actually think that can be a really good spot to start, because if you can't get the people who love you the most using your app regularly or using your product regularly, if they, assuming that they make sense within your target market, but then, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to get other people. I think the other thing is it's really getting that first core set. So whether that's kind of finding people on Twitter, finding people through startup communities and saying, startup founders love to try other people's products and see what things are. That can kind of give you those first signals. From there, as much as you can to kind of get referrals from those customers to get that next set of users and get people talking about your product and trying it out and testing things, the better it will go.
Yeah, no, I think sounds like a lot of steps in terms of reaching out as well that most founders should make too. Which I think people talk about it these days on the communities, but I'm sure back then these would have again been learnings of doing wrong things and then trying to understand, oh, I should have probably reached out to this person. I thought, well, why, but like, it's better I reach out to the person. So yeah, that again makes a lot of sense. And I think most of them, I also recently happened to see a Twitter thread where one of those early founders were trying to talk about how just building is not enough. Like keep on building. It's not like, somebody's just going to come and discover your product. So like you said, make those proactive connections and like reach out to people is definitely like an important step. So yeah, maybe on that.
I think within that as well, there's another element, as you said, like just building the product's not enough. As much as we kind of as product managers like to think that we're the most important people in the room, this is where like product marketing and positioning is really important as well. And I know often as founders, you're wearing both of those hats. And like, I think, it is also a thing of making sure you're articulating what your product does in a way that when the people who you are targeting hear your message, they will understand that you're for them. So there's a lot of great material out there. I would recommend any of April Dunford's work on positioning. Because if you can build the best product in the world, but if you're articulating it wrong, no one's going to know that they need to use it.
Absolutely. And we had April on the show like a couple of weeks back.
Oh, excellent.
She had like a perfect masterclass for all of us in terms of product positioning. So yeah, any day, highly recommend April's book in terms of learning about positioning. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that, April. Another panel question with respect to talking about founders and talking about these different channels. So most often, people just use the product market fit term as a cliche, right? Like often just people just come to you and like, hey, have you tried achieving your product market fit? Do you have that covered? So there's also this quotient about founder market fit because these are like very early stage founders and they're just trying to understand if there's an audience. And like we just discussed about channels, there is channel market fit as well. So how do you go about evaluating the other two things, which most often people don't tell you about?
Yeah. For founder market fit, I think one of the big things, there's kind of two questions that play into that for me. One is, why are you the person to solve this problem? So like obviously like a lot of times startups are founded out of a need that you saw yourself or you experienced yourself. And so then you want to go explore that. There are times where people see needs that aren't them, but feel like they can help. And particularly if it's in one of those categories, I would say like you really need to question what you're doing with this. Mostly because a lot of times, particularly in tech, we have a tendency to have a little bit of hubris that we can solve all the problems that are out there without fully acknowledging that like there are other people who are doing really great work in that space as it is. So if you're kind of like in that spot where you're really saying like, why am I the one to do this? I would also start by saying like, who else is doing something in this space? Who else, especially, I'm going to like double, triple down on this if you're doing something in the social impact space or kind of the solving any of the kind of headline world issues. Make sure that you're not discounting the great work that people in different charities have been doing, that people who have been on the ground solving these problems. Tech is not the answer for everything. So step one, evaluate like, why am I the person to do this? And if you still think that you are like, if you like, yes, I have something to contribute to this area. Then I think the second thing that you have to ask yourself is like, am I really in this? Because if you are founding a startup, it is your life and breath for the next however many years. And if it is a space that you can't stay interested in for more than kind of 5 or 6 months, then it's probably not the space for you. And I think it's okay to say like, you know what, this isn't the thing. I was chatting a little while ago with a founder on, a specific product, and was actually asking me to kind of come along for some of that journey. And as I started thinking about it, I realized like, I really believe in what they're doing. I really think that this is great. I don't necessarily think that it's not the problem that I want to spend the next 5 years of my life focusing on. And that's okay. And I would rather, it's like, leave it to people who do want to do that. So that's kind of the two things to me is like, why am I the right person? And am I ready to be in this?
Yeah. I think it sounds like a very interesting approach in terms of asking those reflective questions, right? Because often we tend to ask these questions only when, like, probably when we are right into the middle of the journey, or in terms of when something doesn't go the way that we expect, and we sort of sit down and we are like, okay, so what didn't go well? But I think these two questions that you just put forward looks like stuff that we can ask to ourselves from time to time. Like you said, it's okay to invest in something like 6 months down the line. You feel like you're not the great person at that point in time to solve. It's okay to correct, and it's okay to think of another approach. So I think for me, it sounds like questions that you can actually ask yourself from time to time, instead of, stuff that you always have to sit down and really at some important.
Definitely. Yeah. And because you won't always know that from day one either. No one starts off on a founder journey thinking like, I'm not really all that interested. Like, you have to have that passion and excitement, but it's just kind of good to continue to check yourself as you go, and make sure that your heart's in it. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's very true about not always being excited about it, but at the same time, using that signal as a check-in to understand what's the journey forward. So yeah, absolutely makes sense. So now we're talking about a lot of products and what it takes to build it. I think I would love for you to share any early thoughts that you had. Like, we were just talking about the airline app as well, right? So when building early stage products, what are some simple ways that product managers or founders can think about building in that delight quotient? Because we often say that an app has to have a great UX, but what is that great UX? What is it that brings that delight quotient according to you?
yeah. Delight is it's a really tough one because there is no metric that truly helps you understand delight. I think, there's an element, first of all, I would not underestimate the value of just making things really simple as a delighter. So many apps today, because years and years of building new features and more things, and you're hearing feedback from customers. And so they build another thing, and all of a sudden the app becomes super bloated.
Hmm.
Sometimes, like, stripping all of that away and building the simplest version where someone doesn't have to think, it can be an incredible delighter, especially if it's processes that are typically multi-step and all these kinds of things. Like, just simplifying that into one or two steps might be nice. I also think that there is an element of, like, when we're under the wire on, like, trying to get as much done as possible and get things shipped and get things out, it's easy to deprioritize those little moments that, okay, well, we just need to get this out. So we were going to have kind of this animation that makes this feel like polished and nice, but we're just going to not do that. I like this is where the art comes in. There is no science to this. It is truly just an instinct to say, like, on occasion, do the thing. Like, prioritize the thing that isn't necessarily going to move a metric, but is going to make your product fun, or is going to give people that little, that thing that makes them smile because they're like, oh, that's clever. And I what was it I was logging into? I think it was maybe Tunnel Bear, a VPN that had a really a really clever animation around their login screen and the way that or maybe it was even like resetting a password or something. But it clearly, obviously, I'm telling this story really well. But it gave me that kind of, this is a couple months ago, and it's like, that was really fun. Like, it didn't change the metric. It didn't get them a single extra dollar in their bank account, but doing that just made the experience of using it that little bit more delight. So
Yeah, no, the fact that you were able to recollect it even after months and like recount and tell me about it is it's a sign that they have probably unlocked that level of delight with respect to the user experience. So I think it makes sense. Like, when in doubt, just simplify things, and anything that could probably I think clever is the right word that you use, because I feel like it shouldn't come at the expense of the simplicity that you mentioned. Like, you can be clever, but not at the expense of making it simple. So
Making it simple or making it functional. That's the other thing. It's
exactly.
like delight can't cover bad product. Like no matter how much you can make it, you can put all the Easter eggs in, you can make it the coolest looking thing on the planet. But if it doesn't do what it says it's going to do or what your users
Mhm.
need it to do, they're not going to come back. So you do have to make sure that you have kind of that base level of functionality before you start thinking about that delight.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense. And now we mentioned about the term prioritizing, right? So I'm curious to understand the days when there was ruthless focus on agile. What was prioritization looking like? Like, how did you go about prioritizing features? What was rise and all of those things even a thing back then? What was it really like?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, things like rice have been around forever. Like whether they were popularized as a full framework, but we did like we didn't call it rice, we called it balanced scorecard. But you would do, here's all the criteria for the things that we want to evaluate, and then you give each one a rating on each of those criteria, and then it comes out with a score on the end. I actually really like I'm a bit contrarian on some of this, which is I don't love those things, mostly because I have been a part of many balanced scorecard rice type of prioritization exercises where you hand it to one person and they fill it out and it spits out a scientifically decided list of here's the things that we should do. You hand it to a different person with the same criteria, the same features. They view it through a different angle, and all of a sudden that list is completely different. So I think that there's danger when using some of those frameworks to make you think that you are like scientifically and the math is telling you what you need to do next. But really, it's just like coding in your own biases. You can make your rice list give you the result that you wanted anyway. And in those cases, like at different points, it's like, cool, well, then just do the thing that you wanted anyway. Like if you're just going to change the numbers to make it match what you wanted to say, then don't go through the illusion of doing something like rice. But I would say, like, it is useful for discussion points. Like, it is useful to have the conversation around kind of like, okay, I really want to do this thing, but like, it's only going to reach this small subset of users.
Mhm.
Is that still the right thing? Like, is that the reach isn't huge, but does it still make sense? And why does it make sense to do that? So those kinds of things. I will also say, I'm a big fan. One of the things that has a little bit in certain cases, I have started to kind of be okay with some of the rice thinking. Um, if you use Itamar Gilad has come out with a thing that he calls the confidence meter, which basically like really challenges what you mean by confidence. So when you say like, yes, I'm very confident, it's like, I mean, it's really simple. Again, it's not scientific. It's, how like if it's just, I think it's a good idea versus I've talked to a few anecdotal customers and have some feedback versus I have done user research versus I have done a prototype and have actual data to back this up. And like the confidence level, I think that that's really helpful in, especially when you're working with your stakeholders who all have their biases and the things that they want, making sure that you are really pushing on, okay, when we say confidence, what do we mean by that? And then you can kind of start to have a little bit better conversations around assumptions versus we actually know this.
Yeah. Looks like it's a lot around like demystifying the word itself, right? Because when we just call it confidence, it's like you said, all the biases just come in and we're like, yeah, I think I'm confident that would just go viral. It's just a very irrational thought that we have and we simply believe that it could work. But getting to that specific thing about why are you confident about it? Like in terms of, are you like, have you spoken to customers or did you have like a certain prototype with it? And like, what about it makes you confident? I think that's a good question to ask. And it's a very different way to think about as well. So, yeah, thanks for mentioning it. Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think one of the other points that we were just talking about is that design, right? Let's dig a bit more deeper into it. So, What delight, if product managers were to get that delight quotient for user experiences, I think it's a matter of product taste. Often people call as product sense. No amount of theoretical knowledge can actually help through with it, right? Because often these are things that you have to just pick up from your experience. How do you think a first-time founder who's also like doing the whole product manager thing should look about this product taste or product sense?
There's a lot of things out there that can kind of help build products. There's a lot of content, I will say right now, that can kind of help you um, learn about product sense. But I think the biggest thing, unfortunately, is you just kind of have to do it and make some mistakes and start to learn where it's like, I can spot potholes 10 steps ahead of my more junior members of my team. It's those things of like, I can just like see the things coming together. And sometimes you don't even know exactly what. You get that little bit of like spidey sense of like, something feels off about this. And then you can start to poke in and figure out where. I think the biggest thing for me on building product sense is, again, I always go back to questions. Apparently, that's my mind just works in questions. But to me, it's like product sense can be boiled down to a couple of questions. One of which is, what's the next, basically, what's the next thing I need to know? So what are my assumptions right now? Where am I in the process? And what do I need to know next to move forward? And then how am I going to get that answer? Sometimes I even frame it as like, what information do I need to make a decision? Especially when you're in a spot where it's like, there's a lot of different ways we could go. We don't quite know where we are, or we don't have a way to choose between two different options or three different options. Starting out by saying like, okay, what information would make me feel confident in making a decision here? And then how can I get that information? And then you go off and typically it's like, okay, so I'm going to go do some user research here. I'm going to go estimate my workload here. I'm going to see how much this thing would cost. And then once you get that information, sometimes it gives you the answer that you need to make that decision, but sometimes it opens a new question. And then you can say, okay, now what information do I need? So it's always looking at like, what information do I need next? And then how can I go about getting it? And if you just repeat that process enough, you start to look at where do I need to dig in? I think the other thing as well is like, you will realize in hindsight the things you should have dug in on that you didn't. So you will say, what do I need to make this decision? Nothing. I know where I'm going. And then you'll make the wrong decision. And the next time you will know, man, I really should have looked at that. I really should have like learned more here. And I might have made the same decision, but I would have made it knowing what I was getting into. And that just takes a lot of time and experience. So I think especially for first time founders or, maybe founders who haven't done a lot of this in this way. This is where also to rely on your network, your board, your advisors, the people who are around you. Chances are most of them have made those mistakes, and have done those things. And so when you just kind of like use the resources at your disposal, if you haven't built that product sense yet yourself, to borrow it from other people, and to kind of, tell them the things you're looking at, tell them the things you're thinking. Here's the research that I have. Here's the decision I think I'm going to make, and let their red flags go off and say, oh, okay, have you thought about that?
Yeah.
And then be willing to listen to that when they make those, when they ask those kinds of things.
Yeah, yeah. Borrowed insight. I think that approach is very good because it will help you discover spots that you haven't thought about. Like you said, one question feeds into the next one, and often you could miss out on questions when you think about it. But another person could give you like a very objective thought on certain things that you haven't really given a certain consideration to. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think like you just mentioned, it's a lot about how you exercise that because yeah, you can probably like just say, oh yeah, I can ask questions, I can talk to somebody, but unless you start doing it, I think the product sense doesn't like really scope up, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. So we also like often have this thought about feedback because we were just talking about speaking to another person, getting a very borrowed insight. So the borrowed insights can also come from customers, right? Because we often can talk to them. We can have a very like let's say it's a feedback session, or we try to get some signals from the audience in terms of are we going in the right direction or not. So do you have like any tried and tested steps, or some stuff that you've done in your career that's helped you like crack that getting the right feedback at the right time?
Yeah, I don't think that I will say I have fully cracked it. I don't think it's a thing that like there's a way to do it and it works every time. I do think, we all talk about the value of user research, user interviews, kind of that continuous discussion with your customers and with people in your target market who aren't your customers. And I think the more that you can get in the habit of doing user interviews, the more you'll be able to extract those insights out of your users in a way that's useful. So in a way that kind of gets you information that will help you make decisions. But of course, when you're doing that, that's very limited sample size. You're not going to be talking to 1,000, typically 1,000 people, in a 2-week period or something. I think it's really just kind of using all of the different techniques and mechanisms that you have at your disposal. So, again, starting with the question of what do I need to know right now? So understanding kind of like, what am I researching to begin with? What do I need to know from my users? And then kind of figuring out which is the right research methodology. So it could be, user interviews, which are very direct talking to users, but it could also be looking at data and looking at how they behave with things, or doing different kind of, kind of hypothesis testing type of technique. So doing a false front door, or doing, kind of putting things out there to see what people click on, and, then looking at the data afterwards that they're showing you, not necessarily telling you how they're going to behave. There's a wide variety of research methodologies that you can do through your discovery process. The kind of at the right time piece, I think, is really difficult. I should say the right time is always like it is, the right time to talk to your users was yesterday. So it's really a matter of figuring out wherever you are in the process, you should be talking to your customers. You should be getting that feedback. You should be getting that insight. It's just, making sure you do it, first of all, and then knowing what question you're trying to answer, knowing what you're trying to like learn from your users. Is it a thing of like, I'm trying to figure out where to focus next in my product? That's going to be different questions than to know whether I'm going to, is the way I'm thinking about implementing this feature going to solve the problem we think it's going to. There's kind of a broad concept of like generative research and evaluative research. And the generative research is the kind of, in the classic double diamond discovery, it's the thing that you're doing in the first diamond of all of the like, what are all the ideas out there? What's all the problem space? What are the ways that I could go about this? Where do we want to focus next? And that's kind of like, just think like starting the process of thinking the ideas. And then the evaluative research is okay, now I know what I'm doing. I'm focused in, I've reached the end of that first diamond. Now I want to evaluate, is the thing that I think I'm going to do work in the way I think it's going to work? So is the solution I have chosen going to be successful, or is it successful as we build it? And that's then when you start doing things like user testing and prototyping and a lot of those things to kind of help you evaluate how you're doing it. It's all feedback. It's just different types of feedback at different points in the process.
Yeah, looking at all pieces of information as feedback, I think is a good approach because I feel like sometimes you can be informed, like you said, like understand what really you need to extract from the audience, have all the questions prepared. But the fun part is the audience can also surprise us with another line of something that we shared, which we have probably not covered ourselves, and we feel like, oh, wait a minute, I think that's something that I definitely did not think about. So let's go a little into what you just said. So to me, I think what combining the pieces of what you said alongside with doing everything as feedback is a very good approach because audience can really surprise us with their findings.
Yeah, that is one thing, especially when you're doing user interviews. like I always tell people to like expect to actually ask like half the questions on your interview script. Because you don't want to move quickly through it. The more that you can get them talking and the more you can just have a conversation. Frankly, a lot of times they cover like 3 or 4 questions in one statement if you give them the chance to. Or it might be a thing of like, okay, I had kind of 4 topics of, inquiry that I wanted to go down in this interview. I only got to 2 of them, but we went really deep in those 2. And that's okay too. Like that's a great thing. And then at different points, it's like, okay, so now when I talk to different users, I'm going to dig into the 2 that I missed because I spent, kind of too much time. But don't be afraid to kind of go off script with your interview, as long as it's like train of thoughts and kind of paths that are getting you useful information.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think the listeners should keep in their minds because could really help with both their PM as a process and also like in terms of generally talking to users every chance that they get, which could be like very unexpected happenstances as well. So it's not like always planned. So yeah, that's definitely a great point. So on this front, Emily, have you like seen any examples in the past where the external factors have really shaped the way that, let's say, these user interviews happen, or the way that product people are able to get some insight from the audience? So, in your career space, have you seen any examples like that? And we're already going through one, which is the pandemic, right? So that's definitely like a very huge external factor. So, have you seen other external factors like this?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot underestimate the impact of external factors on your research and on how just even on how your users are using your product at any given time. So, of course, we just went through the pandemic. That was a huge one that, like, so from my perspective, Mind the Product, we did a whole lot of in-person events. And if we had interviewed our users 3, 4 years ago about like, do you want to have conferences remotely? Like we would have heard a lot of, and I know because we did actually, like, a lot of it was like, honestly, the value is getting out of the office. It's getting into a different space, thinking about your craft, the networking, all the exciting things. I want to see my friends. And so like the answer would have just been like, no, like that's not what I want. Obviously that's gonna dramatically change. And then as people learn new things, it actually changes what their preferences are when things kind of go back to quote unquote normal. I know we are not there yet, but where you start to realize, I know a lot of us who were on the road a ton before the pandemic and then all of a sudden had to go nowhere. I think it's caused a lot of people to reevaluate as things start to open back up. Do I want to be on the road as much? Do I want to change the way that I work with my customers, the way that I work in my business to not travel as much? Well, then what that means is, cool, you had all of these things that you did and consumed and products that you used when you were traveling heavily. The way you interact with them is going to be different than it was pre-pandemic. And we all have to kind of continually make those shifts. And then, so other, kind of external factors, like honestly, we're at the beginning of another one with the economy is in a little bit of a shaky state. Not sure if you've heard.
Definitely another factor. Yeah.
Yes. Which of course also impacts us as as founders and as people in tech. Like it's like the VCs are making very different, their investment decisions are changing and what they value is changing. And companies that are in that scaling point and about to go to market, like go IPO, what the market has valued is completely changing. That is also impacting our users and our customers, whether or not your users are tech people. It's like everyone's feeling this because of inflation and because as other companies who are more directly impacted start to tighten down on things, that changes, it just ripples through everything. Even just buying behavior, economic uncertainty. I'm not being impacted right now, but I'm a little nervous that I might be, so I might start saving more. Like those kinds of things start to happen in the market where it's like, it may be self-fulfilling prophecy in some places, but still very real. So that's a really long way of saying yes. External factors do greatly impact the feedback that you get and how you can use that feedback. And I think the biggest thing to say is like, the more insightful piece is not that that's going to happen, because I think everyone assumes. It's more thinking about how valid is the research you just did. Because again, if I were to use research that I did in 2019,
It's not going to work out.
it's not going to be super, super useful. Now that's easy to say 2019 to 2022, but like if I used research in a lot of cases that I did in January of 2022 versus research I did in May of 2022, because the economic environment like shifted, felt like overnight. I don't know, from my perspective, it did at least. And so it's like you can very quickly, the things that you learned and the things that you know can shift really fast. And so it's good to, when you see those external factors start to play in, make sure that you are calibrating for that correctly, and not assuming that the things you just heard 3 months ago actually still stand today.
Yeah. And what's more, I think, concerning about this is that it's not just going to be rational, research points, right? Because a lot of what we're just discussing is, it sounds like very emotional driven research as well, in terms of insights that you gets from the audience, whether it's with respect to preferring a work from home job or preferring to take a conference remote, or as versus trying to save because you potentially see a recession. So I think all of these are, as much objective they are, I think it's also driven a lot around core motivations and very emotional aspects of things. So I think that's like trying to put a metric around it and trying to rationalize around it is going to be very difficult, and as much exciting for product folks, but going to be very challenging, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, human beings are not rational. There is nothing rational. And that emotion, like even in things where you feel like it probably shouldn't. I was once doing a consulting project where we were working with a company on a lot of their internal tools, and the way that they like process things, is kind of basically people who were doing repeated tasks daily inside of a company. We had one of their users during our user research start crying when talking about like the different aspects of what they were doing, not because she was super passionate about like what they were doing, but they had been under immense stress. And like the things that we were talking about, and we were like hitting things with her that were emotional triggers. And I'm literally talking about order processing kinds of things, but it's like that it was the core of who she was, and like some of the fears that she was having around like, is this going to change the way that I work? Is this going to make me less valuable if they do this in this way? And like completely clouded the way that she looked at even just giving us feedback. And so like there is no part of our lives that's not emotional, because it's like in some way, when you really go down to it, like we are fear-driven creatures. Like it is so much easier to motivate through fear than through anything else. And like, if you start looking at things like, man, I can see where this can play into somebody's fears. So just be aware that like, we're not rational, and and we have to figure out how to work within that. That is an assumption that's not going to change.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think knowing that, coming to terms with that by itself is very powerful, because the minute you know that we are irrational, we have concerns, we get driven by fear. I think the way you look at whether it's processing feedback or whether it's trying to talk to your users, I think you would start putting their values and their concerns much more onto the plates than looking at just what you would get out of it. So yeah, definitely like a very powerful thing to think about.
And I also have to say, just for avoidance of all doubt, like don't be the person who goes and preys on people's fears to be successful and build your product. Like, because we do know this, and it is a thing that's really easy to do. Like, be a good person. don't
Yeah.
get people's fears just because you see it happen and you know how you can manipulate that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I
I'm
think you're
anyone listening to this would not be that person, but I have to say it anyway.
No, I think it's important that we say it as well because, yeah, I think there was a point in time when fear-driven marketing tactics were really going about it with respect to, I think people were really learning the concept of what is a sense of urgency versus a sense of fear. So something that you say like, hurry, just get this, could also be termed in terms of really playing with somebody's emotional quotient. So I guess there's a very thin line between what motivational triggers can do as versus, like you said, what fear driven tactics could do. So, yes, everybody just need to this. Please do not indulge in any of that. Yes, of course. So, Emily, I think I would really want to, as a last question, bring in mind the product community into picture because I've been an ardent follower of the community. I've listened to all the talks that you've been posting about, and I would love for you to like just tell us what plans do you have as for the community? Where do you see things going?
Yeah. So, we have been through a big roller coaster over the last couple of years, and kind of really looked at what our purpose in the community was. So, our mission at Mind the Product is to make product people more successful by coming together to further our craft. We used to do that primarily through conferences, and realized through the pandemic time that like there are lots of ways that we can help product people become more successful. We still love our conferences. We are still doing them. I'm very excited for a London event that's coming up in October. But really it's more about finding the ways to kind of connect people between those conferences, because while it is important, I think, to get that like injection of inspiration once or twice a year. We don't just learn by doing things once a year. We learn by regularly interacting with and thinking about how we're doing things. So we're continuing to put focus into our membership program where people can kind of learn all year long, connect with each other, connect with different thought leaders, hear different stories, as well as our training and kind of helping people work through the things that they're doing in a very hands-on, instructor-led way. So I think that we'll continue to just find ways to raise new voices and get different ideas and help us all become better by working together. So the other thing I'll just flat out plug is that like a lot of our product tank meetups around the world. So we had product tanks in over 200 cities. A lot went quiet over the pandemic when we couldn't get together in person, and it didn't necessarily make sense to do them all online, but we're starting to see them come back. So I encourage you to find a product tank near you and connect with some of your fellow product people and your fellow founders.
Definitely. And for the listeners, yes, I would love for them to discover the talks from the community website and also try and attend those product tank events. And all the very best for the upcoming conference as well. So, yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I think today's episode has really been a fun ride for me to learn a lot of things, from the times that we actually didn't know what product management really was. So from then to now, I think it's really, great shift. And as somebody who's seen both of those shifts, I think their insights were really, really interesting and valuable. So thank you so much once again for being on the Founders Voice.
Thank you very much. This was fun.